Hello everyone, Transformers Panko 328 here, and it's a topic so general I don't know what to mock about it. Cue intro! Final bosses, the last challenge of a campaign that will put you through the ultimate test of your skills. Sometimes they're memorable for their longevity, sometimes they stand out as a climactic moment in the story. Maybe they're just a ton of fun to beat, or maybe it's a combination of the three or some other thing I'm forgetting. For those wondering why I'm making a final bosses countdown before a normal bosses countdown, I still have to think about which standard bosses would make that list. Until then, here are the top 10 best final bosses I've faced in video games. Why is it taking me this long to discuss a Transformers game? As much as most of them suck, War for Cybertron is one of my favorite games of the 7th console generation. The graphics were incredible, the gameplay was thrilling and made great use of the transforming part of the franchise, and it treated the license with dignity and respect. Sure, the sequel is generally much better, but I haven't played that game, at least outside the demo. So this leaves us with War for Cybertron's final bosses, Omega Supreme from the Decepticon story, and Trypticon from the Autobot story. Both battles begin at the end of the semi-final chapter, with the player faction basically unraveling the alt modes of the bosses, and the final chapter is dedicated to defeating the Titans of Titans themselves. Neither one of them is vulnerable on just any part of their bodies. One must aim for their weapon systems. With Omega Supreme, it's as simple as shooting at them, but with Trypticon, it involves activating an Energon battery belt, then shooting at the batteries that pass by Trypticon's weapons to damage and ultimately disable them. Omega then tries to restore himself with Energon batteries, which the Decepticons must then corrupt with Dark Energon to make Omega vulnerable. After a few shots and a couple repetitions of the aforementioned sequence, it seems like Omega's down, only for him to literally get right back up with even more powerful attacks, but with an exposed weak spot throughout the rest of the fight. After enduring Omega's onslaught and destroying the exposed part of the giant, Megatron then proceeds to corrupt Omega Supreme with Dark Energon, and proceeds to monologue about how he's all-powerful.
The universe shall hear my name and tremble!
Back with Trypticon and the Autobots, the oversized Dinobot then drags our Autobots down to fire at them and slam his tail some more, only to eventually expose some vulnerable spots on his chest due to overheating. Once destroyed, he drags them down again to do the same thing, fire more missiles, and even use his tail like a scorpion stinger while the Autobots fire at his now exposed back panels. When they're destroyed, Trypticon finally goes down, but not before a desperate final claw grab that doesn't hurt that badly. What makes these fights so awesome is their size. They're huge, even for Transformers standards, and they're fun to take down as a result. At the very least, High Moon Studios knew how to end their game on a high note. Now, if only that Omega Supreme and Trypticon battle teased in the credits actually happened. Out of all of the final bosses in the Sonic series, how is it that the one from the worst Sonic game before Sonic Boomfall Quality Assurance turned out to be the one I like the best? The other final bosses, both 2D and 3D, are either too easy, not epic enough, or implement some other intrusive gimmick or screw up the physics and ruin the entire battle. So what did Solaris out of all of them do that the others didn't? Ironically, make the gimmick work mechanically and keep the physics unhindered. Considering the game it's from, that's quite an accomplishment. So it starts off with Supersonic, and an immediate botch-up. You see, Solaris can only be harmed by a certain Super Hog at a time, but you're only allowed to cycle through them in a specific order. Sonic, then Shadow, then Silver. Guess the order it tweaked to. Yup, Silver, Shadow, Sonic. This means you have to switch to one character and immediately switch out to another, simply wasting your time. It's also annoying that sometimes the rocks Silver needs to throw can be blocked off by more of them flying in the same area. Otherwise, it's satisfying to harm the multidimensional god's armor. After a few more hits, it finally goes down.
Is it over? No, it's not over yet.
As is typical of final bosses, Solaris has a second form, the Hyrulean Emblem. Okay. At this point, the battle becomes an endurance test, seeing for how long you can hurt the creature with the limited amount of time you have with each Super Hog, evading its actually damaging attacks in the process until you have to switch to keep the battle and thus the momentum going. Do I even have to mention the music? Easily my favorite part of an otherwise terribly designed game. I'd make a joke here, but I used up my boon card early, and Sonic 06 is a walking punchline to begin with. So I got nothing. Bowser's been the final boss of a lot of Mario games, and sometimes it can suck when he's either given up or just copied his previous tactics, which he seems to be a big fan of doing. To be fair, it can work beautifully when he decides to test your platforming capabilities to their limits. I'm putting both the new Mario Wii and 3D Land versions on the list in the same spot because, when you get down to it, both are very similar in structure. It's just that one of them tests your 2D platforming skills, and the other tests your 3D platforming skills. While he doesn't grow giant in 3D Land, both battles involve running from Bowser and his fire breath in the super intense version of a standard Mario level. The Wii one feels like running from a kaiju, while the 3DS one feels like Bowser's throwing everything he's got at you while you're just trying to get the hell out of there. Both even homage the original battle at one point, and culminate in beating the Koopa King with a single large You Win button at the end of it all. So long, gay Bowser. Wait, what? I mentioned way back in my early days that Portal 2 was one of the best games I ever played. I still stand by that, and the final boss is a great example of why. When you arrive at Wheatley's chamber, he proceeds to bring up the time limit and then monologue about how he learned from Gladys' mistakes from the previous game, telling us his brilliant 4-part plan. The only problem with this plan? The bombs can break the tube containing the white gel, coating the entire room with portalable surfaces, ruining part 1 of his plan. From there, it utilizes the other gels and your portal knowledge to basically repeat the Gladys fight, but in reverse. Much like with Gladys, the cores steal the show. From the useless facts of the fact core, to the adventurous discussions of the adventure core, and of course, space! Which is how this battle ends actually. The game makes you think you'll win by pressing the stalemate button, only to reveal Wheatley's brief moment of intelligence by having him booby-trap it. The issue is that it leaves a hole in the ceiling big enough to aim at the moon. Yeah, you get to fire a portal on the moon! As a result, though, Wheatley is now trapped in space with the Space Core. Aww, I really like the guy. Wheatley had a lot to live up to, as the Gladys fight from the original was just such a memorable and well thought out climax, but thankfully Wheatley lived up to that hype. It also had quite a few hilarious moments outside of the cores.
Substitute core, are you ready to start? Corrupted core, are you ready to start?
What do you think?
Interpreting vague answer as yes.
No. Didn't pick up on my sarcasm.
I've only played 2 Zelda games. 4 Swords Anniversary since
It's a free download!
and Majora's Mask 3D. Guess which of the 2 is on the list? While not hard, Majora certainly left an impression for one great climactic battle. Form 1 is the mask itself, spinning around the room and maybe firing an eye laser. You can spin attack during the ground spinning to make it vulnerable, and the mirror shield can reflect the lasers back for the same effect. About halfway through the battle, the boss remain masks pop out of their resting places and start attacking you with annoying orbs. It takes a couple light arrows to destroy them, even though you'll need them for later in the fight. What's worse about those masks is that they'll last throughout the entire battle if you don't dispose of them, which makes them quite the effective distraction during the whole fight. Once the mask itself is down, it then spontaneously grows limbs and stops actively fighting you and starts just doing whatever the hell it wants, like a child on a sugar rush that refuses to listen to their parents and their hyperactiveness. This form's only attack is a wave of paralysis balls, though the attack has an easy calling card and can be easily blocked. For the rest of the fight, it just runs around, doing the Cossack, even the moonwalk. In the moon. That was intentional. After that big lipped alligator moment, it gets pissed, thickening its limb muscles, sprouting whips for hands, and looking almost nothing like the actual mask. While the whips give Majora quite the range, a good light arrow will stun it for a brief second or two. Enough time to damage it a little before it flies away from you on the other side of the arena. It'll take some time, but you'll beat it eventually. Or you can just use the Fierce Deity's mask if you got that. Even though it's cheap, it's still a satisfying way to end the game. A memorable boss with a sweet endgame reward, Majora is one mad mask I won't be forgetting anytime soon. Not to mention the possible interpretations one can have about the scenario in question. I'm not that pretentious, so let's move on to something a lot less subtle, shall we? This spot goes to Sen Armstrong from... Oh, hey look! A broken record. Yes, I've gone on and on about how great a final boss Armstrong is in both my Revengeance bosses and hardest bosses countdowns, so there's not much else to say that I haven't said in those videos. Although for those who are seeing this video before my other ones, I'll give you the skinny. He is the perfectly absurd final boss for the perfectly absurd game that is Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. I hate to be brief, but I hate to repeat myself a lot more, so let's move on. Of course I play games for fun, but sometimes I'm looking for an experience unlike anything else. And I got that with the final boss of Shadow of the Colossus. You lose your only companion right before you reach the lair of the behemoth of behemoths. It's raining, you're exhausted, and likely not helping your mood is the sorrowful masterpiece that plays throughout the entire battle, Demise of the Ritual. Running right for the Goliath is suicide, as its homing shots will hurt you, knock you back, and even kill you before you can even inch your way forward. You have to navigate your way through the various extrusions of land as cover and under tunnels to avoid the attacks and make it to the giant's bell skirt. The ascension is admittedly boring on its own, seeing as how the Colossus can't hurt you anymore, but it's still full of tension, as the setting, the weight of the prior buildup, the scale of the beast you're climbing, and the somber music seems to put you in a very different mood. You expect the final boss to be epic, climactic, and highly satisfying, but this one is depressing, sorrowful, even unfulfilling. Surprising how one moment really makes you feel for those seemingly mindless, humongous creatures that you picked off one by one. This isn't a battle to play over and over again, but a moment you remember, because it sticks. As I said earlier, it's a gaming experience unlike any other. So let's drop this melancholic nonsense and move on to the next entry, shall we? In many ways, the latest Smash Bros. Game is the best one yet. Most of the intrusive mechanics from the last game are gone, and in their place are more characters, the ability to somewhat make your own character, a good variety of modes to play, achievements and challenges, and the best boss of the series at the end of Classic Mode. To be precise, you fight Master Hand only at low intensity, and Crazy Hand joins in higher up. But once you reach 5.1 or higher, when you take down about 25% of Master Hand's health, Crazy Hand will disappear and Master Hand starts spazzing out and morphing into a huge swarm of black mist. The closer you get to the maximum difficulty, the more forms you fight. Like a humanoid that lifts the entire stage, a scorpion thing that reminds me of a Zelda boss for some reason, floating swords that test your ability to block and dodge, and a slightly larger version of you. Though you can send it out of the arena, it can also perish after taking enough damage, like the previous forms of bosses. From there, you're free to smash that Master Core until it hits a percentage where you can send the thing flying in a blaze of glory! Unless you took too long, in which case it will float to the center and perform some off waves before giving up. Yeah, that attack! It even has an extra form for even higher intensities on the Wii U version, called Master Fortress, which is crazy, difficult, and intense. Challenging yet fair, and very fun and rewarding, especially for hardcore gamers who prefer higher difficulties, this is one boss I'm glad to have beaten, and I want it to return for future entries. Somehow. I know I mentioned this fight back in my hardest bosses countdown, but unlike Armstrong, I hadn't made a countdown where I discussed how awesome this fight was. And I got nothing. Again. I've had Metroid Prime on the back burner for years, and when I finally beat it, my biggest disappointment was with how long it took me to get off my lazy ass to beat it. But that's not why you're here, now is it? The game's name already gave away what the boss is, so let's not waste any time. After collecting all 12 Chozo artifacts and having a kick-ass boss fight with Meta Ridley, you must then traverse through the Impact Crater, a short mini-dungeon with Phazon so potent it bypasses your Phazon suit's resistance to it. It also contains Fission Metroids. I hate these little bastards, but that's a story for another list. Anyways, after a brief trek through the crater, you come across the worm of the Chozo lore, the titular Metroid Prime. The only monster with insect limbs on its face that don't look like a mustache. Prime is invincible on most of its body, to the point where shots are outright reflected off its carapace, which can damage you in turn. The only way to hurt the creature is in its eyes, and even then it'll only be vulnerable to one of your beam weapons at a time. This forces you to use all of your beams in a true test of skill. You can even use up your missiles with the various beam upgrades you found throughout your adventure, like the super missiles, flamethrower, and the wave buster, which makes the boss look like a rejected Ghostbuster scene. That's not to say it'll just stand there and take the heat. As Metroid Prime will use homing orbs, a barrage of missiles, a tractor beam, and even beams of his own, which match the properties of his current weakness beam. The fight itself is long and takes you through 4 sub-chambers before it finally ends, but that just adds to the intensity of this battle. Taking too much damage will result in you having to do the entire thing all over again. Not to mention, you've gotten this far, so what's stopping you from ending this epic adventure? Add that with the ever-present atmosphere that the game does so well, as well as the equally present immersion, and you've got a long boss that is truly blood-pumping and memorable. Once the boss is down, out comes its second form, the core essence of Metroid Prime. Here, it's invulnerable to everything you've got. So how does one defeat this thing? You must avoid its shockwaves, wait for it to crap out a puddle of Phazon, stand in the stuff, switch your visor to keep an eye on the thing since it turns invisible, and let loose. Repeat until the battle is over. This phase is quite the breather compared to the last, since the shockwaves aren't that hard to avoid, and unlike the prior fight, it's all awaiting you. But that's also intense, waiting for the thing to stop attacking and give you the opening you're waiting for. Once defeated, it turns into a not Core Extra infusion, yanks your Phazon suit, and promptly blows up. A true test of your combat abilities, and even a puzzle boss, albeit a simple one, thrown in for good measure, Metroid Prime will stand, float, as one of the most memorable battles in gaming history. There are many things the previous bosses had in common. Scale, intensity, difficulty, length, atmosphere, immersion, and fun. If only there was a final boss that combined as many of those as possible. Aha! I should look no further than my favorite gaming franchise, Kirby. It's one of those reliable Nintendo franchises that'll always give you a good time no matter the title, with no infamous screw-ups like Sonic 06 or Metroid Middle Finger. As a fan, my favorite is Kirby's Return to Dreamland. God, I love this game. Even taking out the development history, the game itself is tons of fun by yourself and with friends. Not to mention, the final boss not only met the expectations of other memorable Kirby final bosses, it exceeded them. Beginning with the almost traditional shmup level culminating in a kick-ass battle with the very ship the game's been tasking you with repairing, you are then taken to what happens when the Fountain of Dreams was merged with the Subspace Emissary, and the final showdown with that traitor Magolor. He uses orbs, lifeless trees, black holes, lasers. Hey, wait a minute! This is just discount marks! Actually, the entire fight is a living shout-out to nearly every final boss in the franchise prior to Return to Dreamland. So the fact that he repeats moves from each foe Kirby's triumphed over before is really quite the treat. Eventually, Magolor puts up his ultimate defense, a star-shaped shield, which can only be damaged with the game's super abilities. You'll be able to use one of them on Magolor twice before he forces it off of you, culminating in the most epic use of the Ultra Sword and Waggle Motion ever. The end! Of any other game perfectly content with that finale, which I would. We then get a blood-pumping last battle with Magolor's soul. Oh, he just filled the Kirby final boss checklist. How does soul form, retroactive or otherwise? He uses many of the same moves as before, though he starts using some of them together, like using the spike portals for his lasers, until he gets to about half health, where he even starts using variations on your super abilities, which can be quite tricky to evade. He even taps into his inner Palkia and tries to attack the fourth wall, especially on Extra Mode. Sure, it doesn't end with another super ability finish like the last form, but that just complicates things. Long, hard, intense, and anything else that makes this battle sound like a sexual innuendo, Magolor is one battle I never get tired of replaying. and is currently my favorite final boss in gaming. I'm Transformers Fanco 328, and I'm a Kirby master. God, that was embarrassing. Damn you!